Hello, everyone. Hello. We are so excited to be here tonight. My name is Jan Barker Alexander. I'm an Associate Dean of Students and Director of the Black Community Services Center, which has been fondly called the Black House for 45 years. We are 45 years old this year. I am here representing my colleagues, my ride or die colleagues, that's what I call them. My colleagues who are always there encouraging students and promoting intellectualism, scholarship, activism, service, and leadership. I am here representing the Asian American Activity Center. If you all would please just stand and let's hold applause, because I want everyone to see the people that are in the community centers. Also, the Black Community Services Center, El Centro Chicano y Latino, and the Native American Cultural Center. Let's give my colleagues a round of applause. In order to put this program on, we had to have co-sponsors, people who are supportive of the missions of our centers. I would like to thank the Stanford Alumni Association, Student Affairs, Stanford Associates, the Undergraduate Program in Comparative Studies in Race and Ethnicity, and the Office of Educational Resources, our boss, Associate Vice Provost Sally Dixon. Let's give them a round of applause as well. So 25 years honoring student activism and the legacy of the 1989 Takeover. Today, I attended a talk for a book launch for Jeff Chang, one of our colleagues who's the executive director in the Institute for the Diversity in the Arts. His book, Who We Be, The Colorization of America. He talked about the greatest social divide in American life, race, that four-letter word. After eras framed by words like multicultural and post-racial, his question, do we see each other any more clearly? He referenced Stanford activism, and specifically the event, the 1989 takeover of the president's office at Stanford. Stanford students were leaders in the tapestry of unrest on college campuses across the nation. Their push to address campus climate in and out of the classroom was the topic of debate on the farm. In talking to a student today, I asked her, what would attending this event mean to you? What would it mean to you? And she expressed awe that these alums were students her age that were taking risk for future generations. She said, you know, Jan, how you always remind us that we think we took that SAT, we took that ACT, we took that test, we, I. But you remind us that we stand on the shoulder of people. And so for me, this is another reminder that we are the beneficiaries of their labor. So alums who are here, please know that the community centers are the repository of your history, of your struggles, and of your triumphs. We are the caretakers of your legacy. And tonight is our attempt to share what activism looks like and grows up to be. I present to you now a performance, student performance, Takeover 89, written, produced, and directed by Ken Savage, class of 2014. You can look on the back of your program to read all of the cast members. Thank you, and we hope you enjoy the night.
No more promises. We want action, now.
Racism is a big deal. Racism is out.
100 years of racism and we still demand change.
Sí se puede.
Caucasians need Black history most.
We will not wait for change.
We want change now. Come out, Dawn.
Education is our right. For our future, we will fight.
What do we want?
Change.
When do we want it?
Now. The students united will never be defeated.
Self-determination for our education.
Self-determination for our education.
Self-determination for our education.
Today we are here to remember,
to celebrate,
to appreciate.
And to fight for more.
On May 15th, 1989, anger exploded at Stanford.
Takeover 89. The roots of the takeover stretch far back into the history of students of color at Stanford.
The takeover was more than a protest. It catalyzed major changes that united students of color at a time when the university was the center of debate surrounding multicultural education.
Students demanded respect.
Students fought for more support for community centers and classes for students of color.
Students sought protection from racial harassment.
Students wanted to expand curricula to include non-Western civ.
In time in American history where multicultural education centered debates, Stanford fought to add more color to its curriculum.
But why did the U.S. Secretary of Education at the time, William Bennett, criticize Stanford with comments saying that Stanford was dumbing down its curricula with these changes?
Our predecessors, the student leaders of the Asian American Students Association,
Movimiento Estudiantil Chicano de Aztlán,
Stanford American Indian Organization,
and the Black Student Union, with allies across the university, had had enough and cannot let these sentiments brew any longer. Asian American students had strived since 1972 to develop an Asian American Studies program. But we were met with comments such as, Asian Americans haven't been in America long enough to merit an academic discipline.
Chicano students struggled for democratic control of their community center and demanded that the university provide them with a full-time dean.
Native American students refused to be an invisible community and fought for a Native American Studies program and for someone to finally teach Native American history.
And Black students were sick and tired of being sick and tired. We were infuriated by the university's inaction in addressing the various racist acts that had occurred throughout the year, including the defacing of a Beethoven poster in Ujima with the word nigger, and a group of white students evoking the KKK.
We. The Agenda for Action Coalition.
The protesters of Building 10.
On May 15th, 1989, we participated in a protest at University President Donald Kennedy's office for the furtherance of multicultural education at this university and worldwide.
We have been fighting for 20 years.
These issues were not new and they were not unreasonable, but they have been consistently ignored until we took more drastic action.
Our mandate for change. Expanding current and adding new ethnic studies programs.
Requiring all students to take an ethnic studies program before graduation.
Increased funding and staffing for all ethnic cultural centers, including full-time deans for each community center.
Hire more faculty of color to teach courses about communities of color.
Changing the university's fundamental standard for student behavior to include a clause clearly stating that racist acts are a violation of that standard.
These were only a few of our demands in our mandate for change.
And on May 15, 1989, we could not wait any longer.
Takeover!
7:40 a.m., about 50 student protesters enter University President Don Kennedy's office.
9 a.m., police arrive and set up barricades to keep onlookers at a distance.
12 noon, rally begins in front of office.
1:15 p.m., Stanford police and county sheriffs threaten to make arrests.
3:15 p.m., students begin to block the police entrance of the building.
3:50 p.m., police surround the front of Building 10. Students sit down in front of the building.
3:55 p.m., police arrest 21 students blocking the back door to the president's office.
4:33 p.m., police enter the office from the back window and arrest the remaining 31 protesters.
5:30 p.m., BSU Secretary Louis Jackson asks students to block police exit.
5:55 p.m. Students form human chain near the Oval but do not succeed in blocking police cars carrying arrested student protesters.
6:02 p.m. Police attempt to break up human chain.
6:30 p.m. Stanford Police Chief Marvin Harrington decides to cite and release protesters on the bus after struggling to get the bus through the blockade.
6:35 p.m. Student leaders announce that a rally will be held the next day for those arrested.
7:05 p.m. The 40 students on the sheriff's bus are taken off in 2s and 3s, cited and released over the course of the next hour and a half.
8:40 p.m. The sheriff's bus drives off and remaining students disperse.
One day,
13 hours.
55 students arrested.
But only one was convicted.
Free Louis Jackson!
Louis Jackson, a black male and a member of the Black Student Union.
Over 700 students took part in a takeover and rally, but only one student faced 6 criminal charges, including obstructing police justice, trespassing battery, unlawful assembly, refusal to disperse, and inciting to riot.
Jackson was convicted with 6 criminal charges and faced expulsion from Stanford, along with a handful of others who were charged with egregious violation against the fundamental standard. He faced 2 years in prison and a $2,000 fine.
This was met with immense pushback from the Stanford student community who rallied to free Louis Jackson.
After much rallying and petitioning, the court dropped 4 out of 6 charges, and he was punished with community service.
What was inspiring was the immense support from hundreds of students. Hundreds of students protesting outside the president's office, at the rally the day after, and at various protests asking Stanford to free Louis Jackson.
Support from hundreds of students who came together to fight for change and to make Stanford a home for all students.
After the takeover, the administration agreed to respond to some of our demands in our mandate for change.
2 Asian American history professors were hired.
A democratic system was established, including students to hire a new dean for El Centro Chicano, and institutionalizing all community centers as full-time with more support.
The president agreed to hire 3 faculty of color each year for the next 10 years.
And the administration agreed to look into a racial grievances board and to revisit the fundamental standard regarding racism.
All these changes after a significant milestone in Stanford history.
One day.
13 hours.
And years of waiting for change until we could not wait any longer.
Though it was just one day in Building 10, it took another 8 months of continued organizing and support work to manage the charges levied against us.
We are indebted to our predecessors for their bravery and passion for multicultural education at Stanford.
But while progress has been made since Takeover 89, there's still work to be done.
We, the current students, have an obligation to fight for our own education.
Self-determination for our education.
What is our mandate for change?
What are our demands?
What hasn't changed since 1989?
And how will we take over our Stanford education and make this a better place for all students?
We shall overcome. We shall overcome. We shall overcome someday. Oh, deep in my heart, I do believe we shall overcome someday. Oh, deep in my heart, I do believe
the best history lesson ever. Thank you to Ken Savage. Thank you to the students who pulled this together in the beginning of the quarter and during midterms, no doubt. And to all of you for being here tonight. Next, we have Professor Claiborne Carson, who will join us to also give a historic perspective of that time. Professor Carson was a professor at the time, and for those of you who don't know Professor Carson, you should. If you've read anything about Martin Luther King Jr., his name is cited right next to that. So I present to you Professor Claiborne Carson.
Good evening to all of you. It's really great to see what I think was a great moment in Stanford's history. This impacted the campus in so many different ways in the last 25 years, and all of you who are part of this, especially my former student, Louis Jackson, I think really deserve the thanks. Yeah, there you are. And by the way, my memory is that after you were arrested, you had to do community service, because I know we had some people in the King Papers Project who were doing their community service by working on Martin Luther King. And it was really interesting for me to be able to go into the workroom and say, if you don't keep working really well, you're going to jail. But this was a really wonderful moment. And when you put it in the history, and since I've been here on this campus far longer than most of you have been alive, I've seen this campus go from a pale copy of, literally pale copy, of the activism over at Berkeley to being a place that has its own tradition of activism. And I'd like to just say a few words about that so that we do place it in context. That the tactics that you saw being used, the idea of students having power over their education, all of that emerged out of the 1960s, and all of it ultimately from the mother of all movements, and that was the racial justice movement that took place in the South, that brought people into the South who went back to their campuses in the mid-1960s and began to see that democracy was not something that was just missing in the Delta of Mississippi, but something that was missing in their own education, that they had no power over the kind of education they were getting. And that this led directly into seeing the role of students in terms of ending the war in Vietnam, the invasion of Cambodia, and all of these events that happened in the late 1960s. But how many of you know that the largest protest in the history of Stanford was not about civil rights, it was not about the war in Vietnam, but it was about apartheid in South Africa? That several hundred students entered Old Union, and it was the largest mass arrest in the history of this institution. And that happened at the end of the 1970s. And it fed into what became a decade of activism that changed this place forever. That during this time, you begin to see a number of events, among them the Jesse Jackson campaign in 1984, which brought a number of Stanford students into the political arena. The continuing anti-apartheid movement, which reaches its peak in the mid-1980s. And then we have the effort to change the curriculum here at Stanford, the movement against the Western culture requirement. I remember the headline in the San Francisco Chronicle, "Stanford votes to abolish Western culture." And I was thinking, we have the power to do that? So, and that effort, I saw a whole generation of students from the day they entered Stanford working on these issues, inspiring people like myself to get involved. The reason why I taught a course called An Alternative to Western Civilization, an alternative view of Western culture, was that students came to me and said, we were told by our professors that the reason why we teach the Western culture class with no text by a person of color is that there's nothing there to teach. And that was a challenge to me as a professor of trying to come up with a course which was taught as an alternative to the Western culture curriculum. And I think that experience of having this high profile, having the Secretary of Education come to the Stanford campus and condemn the students for, as it said in the play, for dumbing down the curriculum, which was a way of saying that we already teach all the things that an educated person needs to know. And I remember the students who came to me and they said the name of W.E.B. Du Bois had never been mentioned in the Western culture sequence that they taught, they were taking. So you had one of the foremost intellectuals of the Western world basically excluded from the curriculum. So all of this, I think, fed into what we get to at the end of the 1980s, which is students taking matters into their own hands. And the only thing I would say about that in terms of my own personal memory is that I recall giving, first of all, there's a picture someplace of me. I was the only faculty member who actually went into the president's office while the students were occupying it. Somehow, the university administration felt that I was the one who could talk to the students. Actually, I went in and I was just very curious at what they were doing in there. But after I gave a talk outside supporting what the students had done, I came to my office in the history department the next day. There was an envelope that had been shoved under the door. It was a personal note criticizing my activity signed by President Don Kennedy. Things happened fast during that period. So this was something that, to me, suggested, it was one of the proudest moments of my life, actually getting that letter. and it reminded me that students who were doing this were empowering me because I could speak on a different level. I could actually get the president of the university to notice me. I was surprised he knew where my office was. I guess he had somebody telling me. But what it did is it empowered a lot of professors. We sometimes have this mistaken notion that student radicalism kind of grew out of radical faculty members who were frustrated from the 60s and became faculty members, and they were the ones who were corrupting the students. And in reality, my memory is just the opposite, that we were inspired by the students to remember what put us there in the first place, what made it possible for someone like myself who, when I graduated from college, the notion of becoming a professor at Stanford would have been like saying, I want to be living on Mars. That it would have been inconceivable for me to be a professor at this university without that kind of student activism. So I'm here to say it was wonderful in a way that I could pay some of that back once I arrived by not forgetting why I'm here. So thank you very much, and I understand that we're going to have the discussion now, and thank all of you for coming.
Now we will be joined on stage by our alumni, our student activists from the 1989 Takeover. We have Mr. Richard Sue, Cheryl Taylor, Gina Hernandez-Clark, William McCabe, and our moderator is joining them on stage as well, correct? And this is going to be a conversation. Alma is going to facilitate a conversation. For some of them, they haven't seen each other in quite a while. What I was able to glean from talking with Gina is when they began to think about, oh, it's been 25 years, they all started maybe Facebooking and chatting, and as you see, they're hugging now, right? But they have also untold stories. They have questions for each other. And so now I will turn it over to our moderator, Alma, to get us kicked off.
Hello, it's such an honor to be here with all these students. I know that we were all here at the same time, but really these students were working here so much more than we even imagined before we came to Stanford. So I came to Stanford in 1988, was a freshman, 88, 89, participated in the takeover of the president's office, and just had the honor of working with these student activists who has spent many years in meetings and teach-ins and marches and just trying to build support at Stanford for multiculturalism, to try to give students a voice here on campus. So it's an honor. It was an honor then to participate with them in the takeover, and it's an honor now to be here again with all of you. I want to introduce, once again, our panelists here. Cheryl Taylor, class of 1990. She was major in history and Afro-American studies. A hand for Cheryl. We have Gina Hernandez, class of 1988. She was a major in history. Richard Sue, class of 1990, a major also in history. And also Bill McCabe, class of 1989, major petroleum engineering and management. We have one non-history major on the panel. I just want to begin. I want to ask Cheryl to begin with us first and tell us a little bit about how you became involved in the takeover and what your role was at the time.
So yes, Cheryl Taylor. I believe I was a junior. Actually, do you mind if I just back up? I want to give a real heartfelt, truly heartfelt thanks to the students who put together that performance, that completely just beautiful, improbable performance. It was wonderful. I mean, it really sort of, I think, touched us truly, especially from, you know, that event 25 years ago. I can hardly believe it was 25 years ago. But anyway, so I was a junior. Yeah, and I was involved from the beginning in sort of kind of organizing the event and trying to sort of work with other students within the Black Student Union as well as in other communities. So that's my involvement. Did you want me to say more?
That's good. Okay, Gina?
My involvement?
Your involvement and your role at the
time? Similar. So I got to know Cheryl and Richard and a whole bunch of other people over my years at Stanford. And we became good friends. And we cared a lot about a lot of the issues that we put on. And we spent a lot of time just trying to figure out what we could do, how we could have a voice and be heard and feel seen. at a place like Stanford that, you know, hopefully is a lot different than it was then, but it could be isolating. It could be, you could be made to feel very small as a student of color. So we banded together. And so I, in particular, made my commitment to build Stanford Mecha the day I got here. I learned very early on as a freshman that it did not exist for a few years, and that was something that I had learned about over, you know, in family conversation, and just I had known about, and I thought Stanford needed an organizing place for Chicano and Latino students, and so I set my mind to building that organization, and then and happily we got pretty strong, and we connected to our roots a lot, and then given what was going on that Professor Carson talked a lot about, I was very involved in all those things, and it became pretty clear to me that we wanted to reach beyond our own community and have an impact.
Thank you. Richard?
Same question?
Yes, just generally.
I also want to say that performance was amazing. It's been 25 years, so my recollection of the day is I can remember the very beginning of the day and the very end of the day, but everything in between, I don't remember. I actually don't remember. But in any case, I was also the Asian American Student Association Issues Chair that year, and we had a campaign that year to. We were asking for Asian American Studies to be developed at Stanford, and we worked very, very hard on that campaign the whole year, and we got our petitions out. We talked to the communities. We got a lot of support from the whole campus, including the administration. Said that they supported our idea, but they weren't willing to put their commitment monetarily and whatnot. To develop Asian American Studies at Stanford. So when the opportunity came up for us to do this takeover together, I was like, yes, we're doing this. It was a very natural progression of events that led up to that. So that's how I got involved.
Thank you. Bill?
Well, for my benefit and perhaps that of the audience, could you repeat the question then again?
No, just for now, I just want you to tell us, what your involvement was and how you became.
Okay. Good evening. My name is Bill McCabe. I'm a member of the Navajo Nation. My clan is Tachini, and I was born for Red Running into Water, Salt Clan. That's how we introduce ourselves when we're a general gathering. So, as you can see, I might be a little older than the rest of the panel here. I was a returning student, and as such, I was looked upon as somewhat of a leader in our community, in the Native American student community, and was sought to for many activities, and in this case, to represent the Stanford American Indian Organization during these times. It wasn't that I was reluctant to do so. I'm a techie, so you got all these history majors. What's a techie doing up there on the steps of the old Union talking about activism and change, But it occurred to me that I needed to present myself to our community in a fashion that would give them reason to follow, in the years to come, and even in the days to come, and the hours to come, as it turns out, and to be able to stand up and voice our concerns as to where the university was at that time, neglecting our peoples, our communities, our cultures. And so we were then chosen as a group here to reflect our thoughts on this and to represent our student organizations at the time.
Thank you. So I'm going to ask Gina. These are some questions that some students in the centers wanted to hear from our panelists about. So Gina, the question is, what were the challenges that you faced as student organizers in mobilizing student support for the '89 takeover? And also, as you reflect on the '89 takeover, what advice do you have for current students?
Okay, challenges, and then advice. Ooh, okay, advice is tough. There were a lot of challenges. I mean, one of them is just, you get tired. I mean, again, so just to step back in a little context, so at the time of the takeover, I was about to be graduated. I had one more quarter left. I had needed an extra quarter. I was technically class of '88, but I was still taking classes, had to take 1 or 2 classes in '89 to finish. And when I walked onto the campus, it was, I mean, what Professor Carson just shared was really important in, you know, me being able to keep going and to do this for 4 years and then to be a part of the takeover. As sort of a final straw, or like the straw that broke the camel's back, is how I felt about it. Like, now is the time to do something really significant. But I had been involved. I walked onto the campus as a freshman. You know, you're 18, 19, you can vote for president for the first time in your life. So I voted in the Democratic primary in June for Jesse Jackson. And I came to Stanford, and there was people sleeping in the quad to have Stanford divest from South Africa. There was Reagan busters organizing to defeat Ronald Reagan in the '84 election. And I just dove right in. I just felt like this is where I belong at Stanford. This is the kind of stuff that I wanted to be involved in, and there was a lot of it going on. And then that evolved. I think, so thinking back, 2 challenges, there's a couple things I would say is you get tired, you need breaks, you have disappointments. In organizing, you might cover some terrain and you're all good, like, yeah, we're gonna do this thing and we're all on the same page, and then the next day or the next week, people have different ideas, or they're not so hip to that anymore, or something changes, the administration says something that changes the discussion a little bit. So you have to like really be relentless and persevere a lot of the time. And I wasn't the best student. I know that now. I also knew that being involved was one of the only ways I could stay here and continue to be somewhat comfortable in my skin at Stanford. But at the same time, you know, it's a lot of hours. We had long meetings, and we talked about these issues, and we read a lot. I mean, I read a lot, you know, about what was going on with student activism at that time, especially with the divestment movement across the country, as well as trying to keep up with my reading from Professor Carson's awesome history classes, where I learned about the civil rights movement. And I wanted to be a part of that legacy. And then we saw it going on around the country. So time, paying attention to your studies more would have been better for me. And just being okay with not having everybody agree all the time. I mean, we had a lot of division in our community all the time. You know, what do we call ourselves is always a debate. I know that's always something you guys still debate, I'm sure, is, you know, how Mexican are you? How Chicano are you? Is Chicano even the right word? Should you be Latino now? What does it mean to me? What does it mean to you? And you can get really caught up in that stuff. But at the end of the day, it was like, I knew that Stanford had us all here now. The other thing I should add is that I have an older sister who went to Stanford. She was the class of 1974. And the class of 1973, my history professors let me know that the class of 1973 was the first significant number of minority students that were admitted to Stanford. It was the class of came in 1969, graduated 1973. And my sister was 1974. And so I kind of had a sense of how far Stanford had come in that time, and it was not far enough. And those debates about identity and what you call yourself really take up a lot of your psyche as a young person, developing your own identity. And I would say the big challenge was always getting, you know, like, okay, we can agree to disagree about all that kind of stuff, but at the end of the day, we want to divest from South Africa. We think Stanford needs to take a stand, to say something, and we want to be heard about that, or about the resources that we have in our community, or about the education. I mean, I felt really, I think maybe some of you still feel this way. I don't know if you guys felt this way. I was really lucky to be here at Stanford, but there was a whole host of my community, my family, my own brothers and sisters who were not able to be here. And I felt a really big responsibility that Stanford should be the best that it could be when it came to minority issues and education and opportunities for us, but that what I went off and did later would really matter to all the people who couldn't be here, or could matter to all the people that couldn't get a spot here. So kind of balancing that, like, wow, we're at this wonderland. What are we going to do with it? How do we keep our studies up? How do we actually get through it? But what is our responsibility beyond my own, success was a challenge. I mean, that's kind of a personal challenge, but I think we all face that. And so some of our long debates about, you know, do you do this thing? So getting back to the takeover. So do you do this right now? Or do you say, okay, the university likes Asian American studies. They think it's a really good idea, actually. But we might not be here to see it happen. And we get impatient as young people. So do we do something now or not? And we had a lot of those debates. So I know there's a quote, I don't have it in my head right now, but there's a thing of like, you know, the power of a few people getting together to do something is better than having full agreement and doing nothing at all, or having every, you know, so I think, you know, that was a challenge. Like, should we do this? Or should we keep talking? So that's some of my reflections about the challenges. I think that, you know, advice is a tough thing. I mean, we're a different generation, and I think at the end of the day, I would say go where your convictions lead you, even if it's not, you know, what everybody else is doing. If you have something to say, if you have something that you really care about and that you're passionate about, it's worth doing something. And it's amazing, it's an amazing thing. So I totally share Richard's sentiment about seeing the timeline was super awesome. Like, what happened out there was not evident to those of us who were inside the building for that, whatever, 8, 12 hours. And what was amazing, I don't know if this is advice, but it was totally inspiring to us on the inside to see the outpouring of support that came because we did something. And then, you know, again, we continued to go on and debate, you know, what do we do now and what's next and how do we actually get some of these things we're demanding after being shuttled out of the building. We thought pretty darn quickly, but it's good to do something and to put your courage into your convictions.
Thank you. I'm going to move over to Bill. Before I ask you your question, I'm going to read a quote from a speech that Bill gave back in 1989, and then ask him to talk about it a little bit. But this is something that he wrote back then. He says, "Among our people, I am considered highly fortunate to have the opportunity to even attend an institution of higher learning. Even more amazing is that my father had the same opportunity and is now an alumnus of Stanford. I am proud to say that I am a second-generation Stanford student. However, I am deeply saddened when I have to tell him that, Dad, we have racism on our campus, that students here have not the smallest inkling of American Indian history from an American Indian perspective, that the stories that your grandfather told you about the struggles and survival of our nation against seemingly invincible odds are again taking form here at this school, that there is not one faculty member that I can go to within this entire university that understands the values that you have instilled within me, and that our people have come to cherish and embrace with all of our being." So that was Bill back in 1989. And we just wanted to ask you, when you were involved in the takeover, what was your family's perception of your involvement in this? Or did you have support from your family? And then also, what were your expectations of the takeover?
Well, thank you for recalling that speech. Again, that was given on the lot of us here were all had a rally on the steps of the old Union on that Thursday. I believe it was May 11th, and this was all preceding the fireworks that were then to take place subsequently. And it brings back some really good memories there. and some convictions that I had back then and that I still hold true to today. But I mentioned I was an older student, so I was pretty much on my own at the time, and I was trying to return back to Stanford and finish my degree. Again, as I mentioned there, this was a unique opportunity for me, and very few American Indians, Navajos even, had a chance to attend such a great university. So I was back here completing what I had set out for. What the path that had been laid before me, I wanted to complete that as well. So there was some conviction in my words there, but more so in my actions. And so this was more for the students that were there at that time. Again, I was a few more years older than them, and they did look up to me for a great many reasons. And I didn't know why at the time, but it occurred more and more as I was trying to complete my studies, and I took it upon myself to then take on that role. It wasn't a role I was unfamiliar with, but they were my family at the time, the students of Stanford American Indian Organization and of this uprising and movement. You said, so there was the support of my family, and what was the other?
Like what were your expectations?
Oh man! So I had a kind of a unique perspective here. My father, as mentioned, was came to finish graduate school or attend graduate school. So I grew up in Escondido Village. And so I watched, and we moved here in 1973. Berkeley was still smoldering, as Professor Carson was mentioned, and the Stanford Indian mascot had just been eradicated, and now they were the backpacks at the student union had a question mark because they weren't sure what the mascot was going to be. Literally, you could get it. I've got a backpack that has a question mark. Robber barons was one of the thoughts. It was on, and the tree, and so on and so forth. I thought, in true Stanford fashion, the color cardinal actually epitomizes the Stanford community. But I watched this community from a very young age grow. I watched housing go up. I watched buildings go up. I watched a law school go up, a business school, green library. I watched all this construction take place on the campus. And one of the part of my speech in there, I even mentioned that we have a clock tower. Even though you can't even set your watch by it, we have a clock tower. All this expenditure going on at this university that's in the newspapers every day and on the postcards. And you go to the Stanford bookstore and you see all these maps of the campus, and it's this huge, expansive place. But yet, all this money that's being expended, none of it seemed to be coming towards student activities, student curriculum, student faculty, student programs. And being part of the Stanford Indian community, we had the Stanford Powwow every year. And this was a totally self-run student volunteer event. Yet Stanford was very quick to come to the forefront to say, this is our Indian community, and laid claim to a lot of this. At the time was the largest powwow in California. Now that some of the tribes with gaming operations have now thrown bigger powwows, but now I think it still holds true that is the largest student-run powwow in the United States, and still one of the best powwows in the land. And yes, absolutely. And so this was our contribution to the campus, and yet where was the reciprocity? Where was in kind that we had expected to come from the university? Well, then there wasn't any. And so my expectations then was, well, we would like to see more Stanford faculty. I would like to learn about more Native history, not of my own history, other tribes. There's 566 tribes in federally recognized tribes in the United States. 350, give or take, in lower 48, and another 200 plus in Alaska. Does anybody even know those statistics that that attend Stanford? Probably not, at least at that time. Maybe not even today. And so, where is the learning ability and the information and the knowledge base that we can provide to other students, not only of ourselves but other students as well, for this well-rounded education that we all are seeking here, and that I think we would expect at Stanford? Those were my expectations at the time, and I knew that we wanted a Stanford faculty member. I think I mentioned too, the amount of history exposed, that the students exposed the amount of history, Native history in Stanford, was a lecture in anthropology on some Friday afternoon in one particular course. That's how they learned about Stanford Native American, the community, and the American Indian community at large. It's very typical throwback to the high school history books of American Indian history. Go and even further back to the Hollywood films. We used to sit in the Stanford American Indian Center and talk about these movies. How one shot would take out 5 Indians. How does that work? But that's what people grow up on, and that's what people believe, and then they look at us and kind of, you don't really fit that. Why not? Well, we wish we could tell you more. We wish we could learn, teach you more, but we have our own classes to attend as well. So my expectations at the time was let's put some of that capital expenditure into education, as opposed to edifices, that we were seeing popping up. And still today, I come back today, and it's growing there is no more open space on Stanford campus that from 73 to 2014. And I'm, one thing, and in that speech too, and I don't know if we have a copy of that or not, Denny, but maybe. It was interesting, because I spent the night before, and people would come in and watch me and encourage me. And the more I typed and the more they came in, the more I was into it. And the more activist I became, and the more I realized how much feelings I have towards this whole movement, and how our portion, you saw the students stand up here with all our logos and our mascots, our representations of our communities. And the more I thought about it, the more I wanted to portray who we really are, and give a very good, distinct picture of this is the American Indian community. This is what we feel is what this university needs to contribute to our education, as well as the rest of us. And so I went through this all, but I finished in that Stanford is obviously preparing for a brighter, more eager student in the future. And I look today, and this is what I see, and this is what I hope for, to be able to see these bright, eager, willing to learn faces in this community that are here and have the opportunity that my dad had, that I have, and I'm blessed to have 2 of my children here as well. Wow. So that's really, that's really all I could ask for at the time, and that's what I stood up for. So I went up on the steps. I'm not an orator by any. I'm a techie. I'll say it again. And I wandered up on the steps of the old Union along with my colleagues here, and we all gave our spiel that day, and that came out. And I, to this day, I look back on it, and it gives me inspiration. I'm still the same person. I'm a better person because of this education, because of this involvement. To this day, I want tribes to participate more and more in the development of their own energy resources. So what I took from here, I've taken on to my own career, but also I left behind what you have today. Anyway, thank you.
Thank you. So I'm going to go over to Cheryl, and I'm going to ask you to share a little bit. It's well known that at the time the BSU did not support the takeover of the president's office, and there was, you chose, regardless of that, to participate and be very active in the takeover. So could you explain to us a little bit about what compelled you, even without the support of the BSU, to go forward and to be involved in the takeover? And also, there's been a lot of conversation about, well, there was the changeover from, Western cultures to CIV. The UCMI report was due to come out. There's kind of all this progress. So why, everyone has said, well, we couldn't wait. We had to move forward. Tell us from your perspective what things were happening that compelled you to move forward.
So from my perspective, I think it was that year, and again, thank you to the students for reminding us of the history. I just remember it was maybe in the last few years before the takeover, we had a lot of victories, right? We had like the Western Civ, we got sort of some new courses that were sort of World Outside the West, Western Civ, I can't remember all of them. But then there was an erosion, there was a backlash. There was the Beethoven incident, where a flyer of Beethoven was, I guess it was there was a lot of graffiti on it, very racist graffiti. There was also, I don't know if you all remember the assessment. Do they still do the assessments, the student assessments? Maybe not. Students had an ability to sort of like vote to, have their fees go to different student groups.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So, yeah, sorry. Maybe they call it something else.
Special fees.
Special fees. And I think it was the year that the BSU did not get a special fee. And so that may have been the year before. And then there was also, just sort of the smaller insults around, like there would be Friday chill outs in White Plaza, if there's still White Plaza here, I don't know. I mean, my God, there's so much building, I don't know if you got rid of it. But, it'd be like, well, why are you guys having this here? And are you trying to turn this into Black Plaza? And just that whole sort of like kind of asterisk neck coming back. And true, the BSU did not support the takeover. The BSU leadership, of which I was a part, met with the president quarterly. And so there was progress, but it was sort of incremental progress. And it was, in my opinion, in my recollection, it was really sort of to mollify us, to sort of give us a little bit, to keep us sort of quiet. At the same time, we were sort of eroded on campus. There were these incidents, and we needed something to move the needle, just to sort of be a dramatic event, where quarterly meetings with the president, would not accomplish, because they hadn't accomplished that. I do want to say that it was a very, it was an extremely painful sort of kind of meeting, BSU meeting after the, that was something I guess you guys didn't cover. That's okay.
A lot of after.
It was like
6:30 p.m.
Yeah, a lot happened after, where, we were vilified, and it was just, it's a question. I think it's a legitimate question. How do you sort of, how do you participate in a democratic organization? BSU is a democratic organization. It still exists, right?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, so how do you exist? Where's the space for dissent? And especially even, sort of a layer down, a more personal layer. So one thing, about me, I'm from the suburbs, I have been told my entire life that I do not sound Black. People on the phone, they meet me and they're surprised, some of them. And the only, I grew up in Santa Clara County, southern Santa Clara County, not this part. The only Black people I ever saw, I was related to. And so when I came to Stanford, it was just like amazing. There was like St. Clair Drake and these wonderful professors, Sylvia Winter, they're all gone, unfortunately. But there's Clay Carson, just these fabulous professors, this intellectual sort of, it was exciting. It was so exciting. It was exciting to be around. And I will say, when I grew up, so I grew up in the suburbs, and, but I read Ebony, and I read Essence, and I read Jet, and so I kept up, and so I didn't immediately get to the Black community, but I knew that was where I wanted to be. But at the same time, I always felt kind of apart and isolated, and not really isolated, but just sort of different, because there was sort of ways that you could be in the Black community. You could be, was it pre-professional? You could be in a fraternity or sorority, or you could, be whatever. But it felt to me very circumscribed. And that I felt like that was sort of a tension that I think really didn't get resolved in the takeover, that I think sort of was brought into very sharp relief. And so I guess I say that all just to sort of describe it, not really to provide any sort of answer or insight for it, but just to say that sort of existed, but it's, and I know this wasn't really part of the question.
That's okay,
but,
go on.
But it's also sort of, I think what I wish I had known then, that I feel like I know now, is that dissension is healthy and it's real, and it exists. As Gina was saying, we don't all have to agree. We don't all have to toe, you know, a single line or a set of lines. But, you know, it's to say that we did it, and not everyone, most people in the BSU did not agree because they felt like we were already, many people, not everybody, many people felt like we were already progressing. But there was, I think, a strand of folks who were very supportive. Alums, our BSU chair from maybe a couple years before, the amazing Bill King, the incredible Bill King, who was off at, I don't know where he was, Yale Med School, or I don't know, Harvard, I don't know where he went, but you know, he's amazing. Called in, so we had like this amazing support. So it was a very tense period that, yeah, I guess it just did not get resolved, but anyway.
I think one of the things just to add is that even though the BSU at the time did not endorse the takeover, that they, you know, provided support after the takeover to the students that were involved. But I think one thing that was really important at the time is that the organizations relied on each other, the individuals relied on each other. You know, we were all friends. We all, you know, spent time together. We worked on committees together, or, you know, we had COP. We had these other connections, so that even if, you know, there wasn't support for that within the BSU, there was support within the other organizations to help that.
And I'm sorry, yes, I do want to say that I think it was the incoming BSU president, Calvin Martin, did write a very lovely letter in support and really sort of criticizing the university for its really hardline stand, not just against all of us, but particularly against Lewis Jackson, where the charges were absolutely, I mean, they could have come out of, let's just say it, like 1955 Jet. It was crazy. I think he touched a woman, and it was called battery. You know, just to sort of, it was the president's maybe executive assistant. And so I think that was a really, you know, sort of amazing thing that we did, that even though, you know, sort of a lot of members of the BSU weren't supportive, the leadership did come out in the end and support, I think, the, you know, sort of like the idea that no, one student should not be picked off like that and sort of kind of caricatured as, you know, a black rapist or whatever. It was crazy.
I mean, one of the, many of, Professor Carson for sure, but other professors, Sally Dixon, there were people who were supporting the students from the repercussions, and there were repercussions. Lewis Jackson in particular, but there was this egregious violations of the honor code. I think we were egregious.
We were egregious.
And what we felt, I mean, I think it speaks to this thing, is we were here. We are Stanford students. In fact, we want to learn more about why we're here, is why we did this in the first place. And we did not think it was right for us to be treated like criminals. And I think you know, there were others in the black community, if not the BSU entity, that said that. It's like, we are part of this community, and we may disagree about, Cheryl, why did you do that against the BSU mandate or whatever, but why is the university giving repercussions that are as if we're criminals, not part of this community, as if we were damaging property, which we realize you don't mess with Stanford property. That's a lesson, advice. Sit in, sleep in the quad, walk hand in hand with Jesse Jackson down the, you know, to the Oval, all good. Occupy a building, not so good. So we learned that, but we did not feel like the punishment met what we were trying to do, what we were trying to say. It was like, yeah, criminal, you know, private property, you can't do this. We're like, no, we're talking about our education. We are, you know, tuition-paying Stanford students. And we expected that excellence of Stanford. We, you know, we sort of thought of it as a contribution.
I'm going to go over to Richard. Richard, so, you know, you were a history major at the time and very involved with ASA. Like, what compelled you to become involved with the takeover? And again, you know, what advice do you have for the students today?
Okay, so like I mentioned before, the main thing for what we in ASA were working on our campaign for Asian American Studies. So that was getting to the point where we were doing the takeover was a very natural progression for where we were at. It was getting to the end of the year. I think we were like a week away from graduating, something like that, or at the end of the year. And I think it's a well-known tactic among administrators that they will wait you out so that until you graduate, or the summer, so that everything sort of dies down.
Or spring break.
And then, and then so that what you end up having to do is like restart everything, the next year. So we were feeling like, we put so much energy into this. I mean, my junior year was shot. I like everything, live, breathe this campaign. And I think a lot of us went through that, like just the amount of energy. If there's anything I would say is balance. Try to, make sure you study. So I remember taking 2 incompletes that spring quarter. So, so yeah, that was the big thing with the Asian American Studies thing. But when I kind of take a step back and I kind of look at the broader perspective of what was going on, and what even led to me being interested in Asian American Studies was a lot around what we did around Western culture. And just prior to that, like in the year or 2 before the takeover, we had a campaign among all the student of color groups to reform the Western culture requirement. So I don't know if you guys all know about it, but there used to be a time at Stanford when everybody had to take Western culture. And Western culture at that time was basically all just about European civilization. And the rationale behind Western culture, everybody taking this one course, I remember this very well, was one of the rationales was we need to learn this stuff to understand ourselves.
And what makes meaning of civilization.
Exactly. But
really, whoa.
Right. And then, but as a student of color, you're thinking like, okay, wait a minute, who are we? I mean, and that's sort of the gist of what was going on at that time. I think a lot of what we're trying to say or do is that, I mean, the 80s were like a step forward from the 60s in the sense that there weren't even minority students here, like people of color, students here. In the 60s, I don't think we were around even. So that's an improvement, but then the institutions or the campus climate wasn't reflecting us. And I think what we were saying is like, we need to be part of campus, Stanford in a real way. And that means being reflected in the courses, in the curriculum, the faculty, that sort of thing. And I think that's what kind of inspired me to do to be a part of this. So.
And did the Asian American community on campus, did you guys have a lot of support? Did you have a lot of participation at the time?
Oh yeah. I mean, everybody was we did our due diligence. We went out and wrote editorials. We went to meetings. We met with administrators. We met with people in the history department. Everything we did, and everybody was supporting us. Everybody was saying, yeah, this is a good idea. It's just that it just comes down to a commitment on the part of the administration, and that's where you get into. It gets more difficult. That's when you're talking about money, actual money. We were very specific about what we were asking for. We wanted a tenure track position in Asian American Studies. And what that means is once you have a tenure track position, it means that the university puts aside money called a billet. And I think it's like $1 million or whatever. And that pays the salary of a position, a professorship position. And what it means is that once they establish that billet, it's a permanent position, so it never goes away. And so we were very clear about that, and the reason we wanted that is because we wanted, again, to feel like this isn't going away, this is going to be permanent, because we had classes before, we had Asian American Studies and other things, and they would always come and go, and nothing was ever permanent. So, that's why we asked for that. And
yeah, I would add, I mean, one of the, and it was really clear in the script thingy, was great. One of the demands from the Chicano community was the full-time deans for all the centers. That was a really big issue for Mecha and for us in the community. And it was similar in the sense that it was not permanent. So the deans at the time, in case you didn't know, your deans who are there for you, who, talk to you about all the things and who are there for the centers, they were part-time at the time that we were students. And they had a bifurcated role being in residential education. I think they were RDs, or they had some student affairs broad for the whole campus. And then their other half was being the assistant directors of the ethnic centers. And we kind of felt like it was similar in the sense that it wasn't a permanent ever to making that community their focus, and being dedicated to the work of building the ethnic community centers. They were, if there's a crisis in the dorm, they got to go. That was, it made that the priority, and it lessened the attention to the community as an ethnic center. And that was a real rub for us. It was also a rub because the person there at the time they preferred the other role, right? I mean, it was more attention in the university, working with a broader group of students that, mattered more. We just felt was a big diss to El Centro Chicano at the time, and to the students who really needed that support and that place to belong. And it's similar in that it was not permanent. It was kind of always there. And so, people who didn't agree, they were like, well, you have the part-time somebody. That wasn't quite good enough for what we expected of Stanford.
I just want to add, I was in the Spanish department, and I had my major was Spanish with Chicano Studies emphasis, and my advisor for that was Tomás Ibarra Frausto. And my whole freshman year, he was off working for the Rockefeller Foundation. And so I never had an advisor to go to, even though technically Stanford had an advisor for that, for that major, for Spanish with Chicano Studies emphasis. So the university saying, we're going to provide you with these resources, but, they may be there for you. You might go in the afternoon to Centro and find the dean. You might not find them. Next year we do budget cuts, and whatever programs you have now may not exist. I mean, that's kind of the feeling was very tentative at the time about what our resources were.
They seem to be we would have meetings leading up to the big takeover. The student groups would have meetings, I think it was the provost. So much hierarchy here. And we'd have these meetings with the provost, and we talked about what our expectations were. We weren't calling them demands at the time. We were calling them, what our expectations were of this university as students of color. And I remember just them being very dismissive. Every time we'd go, we'd lay these things out. Well, okay, fine, and off we'd go. And we got tired of this attitude of being very dismissive. They're just waiting for us to go away. Maybe they're waiting for the quarter to end. But I do recall that, and it tended to ignite the ire of the group and of the masses that were particularly involved with this. And I've been there's this big study with tribal economies and why they tend to be dysfunctional in a current age. And in this study, they expected, they didn't expect the American Indian to still be around. We're not supposed to be here. We're not. According to, if history would have gone the way they thought it was going to go, we weren't supposed to be here. Well, and yet now we are a thriving community. And so this is what Stanford was dealing with, not only just the Native American community, but just the minority students in general. We're a thriving, growing populace now that has certain expectations of the institution we're attending. As we want to be educated in a manner that we feel is fit for an institution of this caliber. That's what we were looking for, and that's what they just didn't get it. And so we nailed the demands on the door. I remember that one day on this nice black hardwood door to the president's office, building number 10. Bam, 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 and everybody inside, I'm sure, was just losing it because they didn't know what we were up to that day. But there it was, stated right there. These are our demands as Students of Color Coalition. As an aside, so we're in the middle of powwow season. We're getting our powwow together, again, all student run. As an aside, this had just been nailed on. They're like, great. I had then to go into the president's office and ask him for his to sign his welcome letter to this year's powwow, And they didn't, so that this big banging on the door, again, hardwood door, big hammer, big nail, lots of noise. In the annals of the quad there. And so then I walk in and they're like, now what? Well, can you But it was interesting times, and Bill here, but as we all have learned at Stanford, you come forward, you find your better self. It challenges you here. It really does. And these were challenging times, and the group you see ahead of us, the group you saw on the screen, they all met that challenge, and they rose to that challenge. And again, this is the result. I mean, what I'm looking at it tonight here is the students of color, bright, eager, young minds ready to learn at an institution of higher learning. This is what I expected, and I mentioned that before. So anyway, wanted to say that. Thanks.
Thank you. I want to give the students or the participants here an opportunity to ask questions if you have any questions, because we can share stories for hours and hours, but I think there's a mic set up, so you can.
Hi, my name is Robbie. I'm a senior. And I just wanted if anybody could talk about student backlash to this, right? So obviously there's a lot of people who were involved, but I'm sure there were a lot of students who were like, what are you doing and why? If just anyone can touch upon that.
Well, we talked about the BSU. Cheryl probably could say a little bit more. We had a lot of backlash. Mm-hmm. You know, we had to go about the work then of, okay, so you want a full-time dean, how is that going to be paid for? So there was a lot of intricacies that had to be figured out. And in those conversations is where a lot of like, well, if you hadn't have, pissed off the university so bad, we might have, so it came out in some of those ways immediately. I remember. I mean, we talked about the egregious thing. We were all cited and released, and so that was the felony, misdemeanor, criminal court side, civil side. On the other side was this the violations of the honor code and fundamental standard, which I'm sure you all are aware of, and so those were also in play. And I mentioned some of us who were identified as having planned the actual takeover. Were charged with egregious violations of the honor code. And that went along with the potential to be expelled. So that was a hot spring, and it, some people were graduating or worried that they were not. Some of us were already kind of through, and we thought, well, we paid, are we gonna get our diploma? It was dicey for that spring. And then there were others who were juniors who, I kind of feel like for those younger than Richard and I maybe, were faced with, do I come back in the fall? What is my situation going to be in the fall? So there was that kind of backlash that was local and in our communities with our peers. I remember concretely the co-chair of, so in Mecha it went down, we voted and we agreed as an entity to support the takeover. And then it was, okay, and you individually, everyone could choose to take part or choose not to take part. And so then some of us did and some of us didn't. And so some of us who didn't, the way it broke down, I was the co-chair at the time and the other co-chair chose not to and was actually very pissed because then part of, I imagine, there might be other reasons, but part of her responsibility was then to defend all those charges, to defend us. And there was a lot of us, a lot more of us than we ended up imagining there would be. We went in 40 or 50, and then there was, a lot of arrests and a lot of other people involved all of a sudden. So I think there was, in our community, some like, now we're responsible for all of this fallout in a way that we didn't ask for. And so that was kind of hot. Like, people were mad at us about the extent to it, it wasn't just oh, we're gonna go sit in, sing a few movement songs and then skedaddle with hopefully some victories under our belt. It didn't go down that way. So, so those were also kind of backlash-ish stuff. And then of course the final thing being the more harsh civic charges against Lewis, that then we all felt like that it's not going to go down like that, and we had to do a lot.
Richard?
But in terms of students, though, my recollection, though, is that we actually had a lot of support, and one of the things I remember about the takeover itself was So when we were in the building, we had taken over, so the administration figured out what was going on, and Donald Kennedy, President Kennedy at that time, did not want to meet with us. So we said, you know, we want to meet with you, we want to talk about our demands, and he would not meet with us. They called the guards or something, or the police, or whatever it was, and they were kind of harsh on us, and that kind of actually elicited a big reaction among the student body. Generally, people got really pissed that the university, you know, wasn't even willing to listen or talk to us as students. They were upset that of the reaction. I think this is very common among like lots of demonstrations, and there was a huge like groundswell of like support. People, students coming out from the dorms, coming out and supporting us, and you know, guarding the doorway and blah blah blah. And a lot of those folks got arrested. So I'd say also, you know, to be positive about this, there was also a lot of support by a lot of students. So
I'll just say a lot of support, but again, the majority, or I'll say in the Black Student Union, the leadership did not support it. There could have been some students who supported it, but there was just sort of not. There was a lot of, I think, anger. I felt we were really vilified. I think for sort of taking this stand, and again, it was, you know, how do you function in a democratic organization where you disagree? You know, can you be an individual? Can you, you know, sort of like kind of take a stand that kind of is consistent with your belief, like what you truly, truly believe you need to do? And that's, you know, a question people have to answer, I think, on their own. But it was, you know, it was challenging, but I think, you know, in the end, you know, we all came together as Stanford, sort of, and not to say that that's the happy story. I mean, we were all, as Gina said, threatened with expulsion from the university council, who I had never met, had never seen before that day, and didn't see ever again. But, you know,
you were egregious.
I was egregious, right, and we were threatened, yeah. But it was a very, very, very difficult, heartbreaking, painful experience, you know, that we went through. But there was support in general.
Yeah. One thing I want to add to just, there's no more questions, about what Richard's saying is really true, is I think we were in our own spaces coming to this thing. So it was hard on some of the Black students. Part. There were other Black students other than Cheryl and Lewis that participated of their own accord in this thing, and our, you know, even with our vote, and then still some people wanted to, some people didn't. What was really amazing to me, well, so one of the reasons we even came up with this, I don't know if you guys remember, was that there was a takeover at the City University of New York earlier that spring, maybe earlier that.
They were happening all over the country.
There was like 4 or 6.
Yeah.
So no, we're like, hey, we got to, you know, like we're gonna do this, right? So the idea was coming from somewhere. I mean, we wanted to be a part of something larger than Stanford. We want, again, going back to that thing of, I'm not here just to better myself, but we're a part of something larger. We want to contribute to something larger, and that they were in there for 9 days at the City University of New York Administration Building.
And the administration negotiated with them.
And well, so it was different, right? City University, private, you know, Stanford University, different, but we took on that mantle. We said we're a part of something going on over there. There was Columbia, there was Chicago, there was something in Santa Barbara.
Been Howard? I don't,
Howard, there was things going on. So, so there was that, and that was why we kind of came up with this idea. And how we were inspired. And I think what was super inspiring was that we were in our own little world of like, let's do this for our ethnic center dean, because that's what we wanted, and Asian American studies, and these things we all united around. But it was pretty darn amazing to see all these people outside doing things that, you know, we're not in our MECHA meeting, we're not part of those conversations that we had leading up to it, we're not at the rally the week, you know, earlier in the week, and who it tapped something in them and they came out. Even if it was coming out to, you know, just pass the flyers around, or people would go back to the dorms and spread the word. And then people who did put their own bodies on the line even more than we thought we were. They locked arms and blocked the doors of the building so that it took longer for the police to come in and get us. So. it was pretty inspiring to see all that happening, and we could have never imagined, we did not imagine that when we planned it out.
Question?
Yeah, thank you for putting this all together. Thank you for coming, everything. We're learning so much from you, and I personally appreciate it. I have a question, but I have something to say first, if that's okay. Okay, so my name is...
Yeah.
What was that?
Just keep it brief.
You got it. All right, so my name is Sharif. I'm on the Students for Justice for Palestine Corps, and I'm coming from Rutgers, where last year we basically stopped Condoleezza Rice from being our commencement speaker.
Yeah.
And basically, I'm coming from a culture where sit-ins happen, and taking over the president's office happens every 2 to 3 years. Where here it hasn't happened in I don't know how many years. So
25, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, I knew that. But what I'm trying to say is it's that long, and the fact that you're having an event about it kind of says something about Stanford. The fact that things aren't being challenged all the time says something. The fact that this is a gathering of 100, 200 people says something. And I'm coming from a place where we're creating a coalition to push things like divesting from apartheid Israel, fighting against mass incarceration against the in the United States, and privatization of it, things like that, right? And we want to be able to change the culture here because there's so much careerism, there's so much, oh yeah, it's all about me, I want to benefit from being at Stanford, and people aren't doing as much as they can be doing. And we want to galvanize students here, and we want to do something, and that's why I'm bringing this up now. There's 100, 200 people in this room, and if we actually gather around and do something powerful this quarter, next quarter, this year, we can change something, and we can have this from not being a 25-year event, but happening every year and the year after, where we force the administration to do what the students want it to do, right? That's why I'm bringing this up, because sadly, 25 years is horrible. It's just the way I see it, and it can't be like that. So that's what I have to say about that. But my question is, how do we galvanize the student body? How do we get people into this? How do we get people to get past this whole culture of, yeah, I don't want to risk my career for this. Yeah, I have things to look forward to. I want to be president of the United States. How do we get people to look past that and actually work together and change the dynamic here on this campus? Now, in this current age.
Does anyone have a?
Well, I do think that, like I said before, you will be surprised at what sentiment you might tap by doing something. The other thing that I do remember is we had, Richard and the presentation and talking with Ken brought back, there was a lot of little steps along the way. And I'd say what of all the things that I remember being a part of, that led up to the takeover, what strikes me is that I'm still committed to this, we met everyone where they were at. It wasn't a thing of you have to go ready to take over a building to be a part of a movement. It was, I'm looking at Bill, but there was all kinds of people who we would go and talk to about our concerns. And we made it relatable to our experience. So having a full-time dean mattered to our community. It may not have been, divesting from South Africa in the same way that others of us were really committed to, doing something that in the world had higher stakes than my full-time dean and my support. But it mattered and it touched us. And we had a lot of those along the way, as well as the maybe more lofty goals of uniting with things more globally or nationally that were really high stakes, like having water in the fields for farm workers and things like that. So we meet people where they are at and make it relatable to your own experience and what you want and need here.
So to the young man that was just here, thank you for your passion. But I would actually recommend that you come by and visit the community centers to understand the history at Stanford. And it's not this snapshot of the year, 5 days, or however long you've been here. It's a very robust history in terms of pushing the institution. So I think that on behalf of all of us, we really would love to see your passion and come by and visit and talk, and we can help you think through some of those questions that you actually posed, okay? So next question.
It's gonna be tough to follow up. I'm James, I'm a grad student here.
I'm just a little bit curious, how much support or involvement was there from the Caucasian students on campus?
You know,
excellent.
there was a
code?
lot, actually. I mean, I think there was just what struck me, and I think Gina said this a few moments ago, there's just, we used to call people random. Do they still say that? Like,
miscellaneous, random. Yeah,
okay.
they do.
We used to say, when we would see people in our dorm we didn't recognize, we'd say, random. But there
That was an ooge. That was an ooge.
That was Larkin.
Oh.
That was Larkin. That was Larkin. Okay. Sorry. That was Larkin. But there were a lot of just sort of kids who would come out of the woodwork and who were just, I think, incensed that this was sort of the university's reaction. You know, that the university reacted with the Santa Clara County Sheriff, not campus police. They reacted with the sheriff. And they were threatening to expel us, you know, for voicing, you know, sort of a First Amendment right of free speech. I mean, we did take over a building, but we didn't really damage it. But still, you know, so I think we did sort of get a fair amount of support from white students.
There was,
yeah.
Well, we organized, well, go ahead.
Well, I mean, there's 55 students who were arrested, and I think the majority of the students who were arrested were Caucasian. So
yeah.
at
Is
least
that right?
like 30 or 30 something. Right. Just by sheer numbers that there's more of Caucasian students.
And there certainly were then.
Yeah, I mean.
I think also it's important to mention CODE, you know, the Committee on Democracy and Education was an organization, actually it was a committee of the COP.
So the ASSU had Council of Presidents instead of what we have now, which is I don't know how many presidents. Right. So the COP was the Council of Presidents. It was part of the ASSU, and the ASSU had a committee called Committee on Democracy and Education.
Right.
And that was like the white student organizing
progressive
equivalent of MECHA, BSU.
And they were, you know, fighting TA cutbacks, you know, things like that, trying to make sure that the resources were available for students and things like that. So they were very active in other areas of the university, and they connected with us, and you know, were very involved in the whole takeover. You have another question?
Next question.
Hi, my name is Elizabeth. I'm a junior majoring in comparative studies in race and ethnicity. First off, thank you so much for coming. Like, we hear like Jangs this little bits of history, but to see the history like in front of us and hear your stories has been like really amazing. And it's kind of like inspiring us, I feel like, in this room to like want to take more action. So kind of like two-part question. Can you talk more about like the collaboration? I feel like a lot of the time when we do collaboration, we're like, should we collaborate? It takes more time. We got to coordinate with all these different types of people. And maybe like you guys talk about dissent within your own group. So like dissent between the different groups, how do you deal with that? And then specifically like to Bill, I feel like because like the Native community tends to be smaller than the other like minority communities on campus, how did you make sure that like your voices were heard and like with that, like with everyone else?
Well, I'll start here. And you're right. When I first arrived at Stanford, I think there was like 50 students, total Native American students enrolled, undergraduate, graduate, something like that. And now today, the admittance rate is about 50, per year. So that's a huge step forward. And whether it was obviously a result of some of the work we did 25 years ago, but more so the administration and the program. But we had a very small group, but it was a very cohesive group, and it was very interactive. Because we were a small group, we shared a lot of program space, event, time with all the other groups, and so we were already enmeshed with the other minority student coalitions, just as a matter of strength in numbers, and so. We shared the same area, well, I shouldn't say shared, but we were interactive over at the old Union office space. The original theme house, before the Indian students had a theme house, we shared with Zapata. See? And so we were already enmeshed with the other groups, and so, but at the same time, we all had the same concerns: more faculty, more curriculum, more representation of our culture, and better educational standards for our communities. And so we bootstrapped, if you will, on that, and we all were pretty supportive of each other to begin with. So a lot of communication going on as well.
Yeah, I would just add, the 80s, multiculturalism was a beautiful idea coming into being. I mean, I think, yeah, we got to vote for Jesse Jackson, and Jesse Jackson talked about how we work together and said why it was important, how it's possible, what ideal that represented. Now, multiculturalism has evolved, I think, in our society, and maybe is not such a great ideal in actual how it's played out. But in the 80s, that was something that was pretty inspiring to me. And again, for me, it stemmed from not only where I came from, LA, which is a big melting pot sort of a place, but it was also when I got here, the activism of the BSU and the African American community for divestment, and how broad of a movement that was, kind of made a place for all of us. And then when we saw what we could articulate of our own experience into that, we just wanted more. I mean, I wanted to know about Asian American history, I wanted to know about Native American history, and I wanted to know more about what I kind of knew about African American history and my own.
Let's take another question. Go ahead.
Hi everyone, my name is Sammy and I'm a junior majoring in comparative studies in race and ethnicity. Thanks. I want to thank everyone once again for coming. One of the things that I think is most remarkable about the Takeover is all of the prep work and dedication that was put into this 13-hour long event. So my question is that there's always plenty of people who say that they're ready and down and ready to do these actions and things like that. But how do we engage with these people when we're doing what I've heard called the less sexy side of activism? You know, the meetings, the education, the readings, things like that. How do we engage those people with those beginning steps in order to mobilize them into collective action?
Well, I think, can I just kind of put your two questions together? Because I think one of the things that we did is we had a lot of sort of cross-campus relationships too. I mean, we would go up to Cal and support, their BSU and all of the work that they were doing. Like, I remember during Big Game Week, we were just like, it's not Stanford or Berkeley, it's, one of us. Because they had struggles too, and, there were statewide organizations as well that we were a part of that I think we sort of kind of meshed with as well, whether it was Black students, it was a African Black Student Statewide Association, MECHA had a statewide organization, I don't know if, and so there was a national organization. So there was a lot of sort of opportunity and many different spaces for us to interact. And yeah, it's a lot of that sort of grunt work of calling and now texting and Facebook is all, people are busy. But I think if you can, as Gina said, meet people where they are, but figure out where you can have a little success, and sort of a success that you can build off of. That sort of may help kind of to keep your momentum going. Richard?
I guess some thoughts I have about that. Somebody earlier talked about apathy, and there's apathy among students nowadays and so forth. And I think we had the same problems back then. I mean, if there's one of the barriers, it seemed like most of the campus was pretty apathetic, or just didn't have the same problems that other people in the world might have. I remember my freshman year, the biggest issue in my dorm was about getting laminated student ID cards. That was because it's probably laminated now, but back then our student ID cards were paper, and people in my dorm, honestly, people are kind of privileged. A lot of people here, it's a privilege to be here, and so it's hard to, when you have that kind of population, it's hard to get people, passionate about certain kind of causes. I think. Speaking for the Asian community, Asian American community, it was tough. I mean, I dealt with that a lot. I still don't even know what the answer is to that, honestly. But I guess it helps me to kind of remind myself that I think the American Revolution, you didn't need 90% of the population supported you. I think that happened with a third or less.
History major.
Yeah, so You know,
You guys are all his-
I would advise you to, you know, see what your passion is, focus on that, get us, even if it's a small number of people, you know, work with that, and then see where that goes.
Yeah. And I just want to add, later during my time here at Stanford, we had the hunger strike and the quad, Mecha did it. And we didn't have the kind of support that we had during the takeover. We hadn't done all that work. We were recovering, we were rebuilding again as a community, but we came together. There were a lot of, you know, committed students that wanted to do something. So, you know, you were talking about share small victories, you know, and meeting people where they are and just not giving up on those things that, you know, you're passionate about that really compel you. Don't look around at who's not with you. Think about who's with you and be willing to work hard for that. It's hard. Next question.
My name is Linda Tran, and I'm graduated of class of 06, and I actually majored in Asian American Studies. Thanks. Thank you. My question is, since this is Reunion Homecoming Weekend, if you can share some of your thoughts about the role of alumni in continuing to support student organizing and movements on campus, because I think there's a misconception that the legacies and the stories end when you're no longer a student, and so I was hoping you can share some of your thoughts on the role of alumni.
I mentioned I grew up on this campus, and so I have a very strong affiliation with Stanford. I used to wear a Stanford bright red shirts to school. And because my dad was also an alumnus, you know, I had a strong affiliation there, just built in, innate affiliation, and then of course myself and then my children. And so I've got a strong connection to this university just by virtue of being here a good portion of my life, but being more involved with what was going on, not only in my own education, but in the activities. You know, we've got a not multicultural, but multi-tribal environment in the Student Center, Stanford American Student Center. Again, I mentioned 566 federally recognized tribes, not including some of the non-recognized tribes. So we all interact in our own little community, but when it comes to working together, we're pretty good schemers together, I'll tell you. And what we pull off the powwow every year is how you know, as a tribute to that. But I'm very strong in my professional American Indian Science and Engineering chapters. I'm involved with that. As a result of being here, and as a result of this 25 years ago, I see myself as a role model. It's a responsibility that I've given to myself, and that it's been bestowed upon me as well, and I look to it as a responsibility. So I can, everything I can do to tonight, to other reasons, you know, showing up at powwow, working with kids in the reservations and working with them in careers, however I can do this, I feel there's a responsibility, and it comes from having this alumni connection here. And I look at this, though, as again, a privilege to have been here. I really do. Not many people, let alone students, not many people get a chance to come here. And so I take that side of it, I take my culture, and I take my experience, and I try to bear it forth to all those that I can touch with what I've learned here and what I've gained here. So combine that with my tribal affiliation, my culture, my family. I try to share that as often as possible. And it's here where I gained my education, you know, and that's my foundation of where I've gone to today, 25 years later. So, thanks.
Do we have one more question, or one more last question? I think.
Hi, my name is Linda Lee. I graduated in 2007 in Asian American Studies, and yeah, we're roommates. First, I want to thank you for the work that you all did in the 80s to pave the way for the institutions we have today. I want to remind students that these are institutions that we fought for, and that we should protect them and also participate in them. And I want to ask, like, how many people in the room have taken an ethnic studies class? That's pretty amazing. Because I know when I was here, there were like 3 of us. But you know, I want to encourage you to continue doing that. And earlier I heard you all talking about, like, you wish you studied more, but you were also fighting for your education and a meaningful education. And I want to ask you, what do you think was the most important thing that you took away from your Stanford experience? either through your classes or your organizing?
Should we start down there with Cheryl and come
Oh
down?
gosh, I was hoping I would have a few more minutes.
All right, well, we'll come to Bill.
Wow. Can I punt for? Yeah. Come back to me.
Well, and I think about it in relationship to the takeover and then everything that led up to it. And it kind of sounds hokey, but it's true. My fellow activists, so the people here on this stage, the people, many, many more who participated in not only the takeover, but things that led up to it, and the people we met sleeping in the quad. I never slept in the quad, but I went there often. The people who went to a lot of the activities, fun. Jesse Jackson came a number of times, as well as the kind of grunt, long meetings where we fought about a lot of things. That's what I really take from the experiences, and it was hard, but I know actually somebody's coming for reunion weekend. We're going to do some more of this reminiscing about the takeover tomorrow. They're going to land, and it's like, hey, can you pick me up? Yes, I will be there for you if you need me. And
can I come stay at your house tomorrow?
Yep. And they're all doing different. We're all doing different things, and some are more leaning still towards the activist bent or politics, and some not so much. I work in the arts. It relates for me, and I know that they're doing something super, super important because we shared this experience together from Stanford, and it makes me want to know about what they're doing now and why it's meaningful and why it's important. And I feel that back from them, and and the love of history, of wanting to know where we came from here at Stanford and where we were going to go from our own, ideas and aspirations, would probably be the next thing, I would say. Know your history. That's one of the things we used to fight about doing every year. We have to do a history of Mecha workshop, blah, 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 and go over it and go over it and go over it. And every time we wanted to punt on that and go like, we got it, you need to know it, and you need to do it, and you need to offer it forward. So those would be my two things.
So I had more time to think about it. Thank you. I think for me, actually, I would have to say it's thinking critically about things. And ironically, I got a lot of that from Western culture, my Western culture classes. But I use that, you learn about things, you learn to, study text and know that, truth is not absolute. And you think about, learning to think about your society critically and question things like that. I think that I really learned that at Stanford in my education, and then I think I applied that in my activism. And I still have that, I feel. And I think that's an important quality or skill to have in life and society when you're out in the real world. So.
Two answers here. I'm a techie. I got a petroleum engineering degree. I have a very sought-after discipline in the United States and the biggest oil boom in the history of the United States. Tribes hold a great deal of oil and gas resources. I happen to have I'm in great demand as a result of the education I received here. It was by design, it was by plan. But from my critical learning that I gained from Stanford, I learned that there's just more than just oil and gas in the world. There's renewable energy, there's solar, there's wind, there's coal, there's alternative fuels. And my critical thinking that I gained from here, I've become knowledgeable in each one of those fields. And as a result, then I can work with any tribe that asks me to come work for them. That's my first answer. The real answer, though, is I was at, somebody help me out here, the deal you go to before you graduate, the big you get
dinner on the quad?
I forget what it's called. Yeah, there we go. I'm a techie. Okay, that's the last time I'll say that. That's my last time I'll use that excuse. I went to this ceremony before we graduate, and they had this this minister from South America, and he had a strong accent, Latin accent there. But he talked about the good adventure, Buenaventure. And his message to us was, you're going to learn what you're going to learn here. You can take it and use many things. You can go rich out, you can do whatever. But the message that I heard from him is, go use it for the benefit of other people. And I can still see him today. I was sitting right there. I actually got up early and got there and showed up. And I could still see him and hear his words today, use your education for the benefit of others. And that, gosh, that rang so true for me. And that's what I took away from this. And I live to that today. So those two aspects combined have led me, to where I am today, to be able to come share with you, my thoughts and who I am. All right, thanks.
Sure. Oh, gosh. Well, thank you for giving me so much time. And some ideas. No, it is not. No, I love history. Oops. I love African American studies. And so I just sort of, and those were my majors. I think what it's given me and what I hope I've done in my career and wherever it's taken me is sort of let me sort of see people as sort of actors in history. And there's I took a number of really great classes when I was here as an undergrad. There was one that I really remember, though, was I think it was it Richard Roberts? It was a class on the historiography of slavery, which is the history of history, which is really kind of fascinating. So it was about like kind of just sort of the politics, or kind of how people have remembered and written about slavery, and it just is sort of informed by kind of the politics of the day. And it just really sort of took history out of sort of this rarefied ivory tower space and put it back into sort of like kind of like the realm of just like everyday people. And so what I hope is that, in addition to everything, like the critical thinking and that this is an amazing education and all the great people, is that, it's sort of given me a little bit of patience and sort of seeing why people react the way they do or don't, and trying to, sort of make different things happen, whether it's, a PTA luncheon or, starting a credit union or, organizing, a takeover of a building. So, anyway.
I just want to add that I also, one of the big things I took away from the takeover was meeting Colin, my husband. I met him as I narrowly escaped, coming out of the president's office. I guess the first face I saw, and 22 years later, we're still. But beside that, one of the biggest lessons that I learned, besides meeting these amazing people that, especially, Gina, for me, when I came in as a freshman, she was an amazing leader and inspiration then, and she's an amazing leader and inspiration now. So, that's somebody that I hold in high regard. But also, the thing that I learned about myself was that I was enough, that I was enough to do something. Because, my parents, didn't go to college. I wasn't born here. I was born in Mexico, and I knew I was enough to get into the school. I figured I could, do the work, but I didn't know that I was enough to make a difference, anywhere else. And I learned here that, it's enough, and you're going to run into other people who are also enough, and you put that together, and you have something very powerful. So that's something that I've never forgotten. I took away from the experience. So, thank you.
So I personally have chills right now because of the energy in this room, and for some that I'm meeting for the first time, for those I've had several drinks with every now and then. It's really great to see, to watch you look at the fruits of your labor, but to understand that the labor is not over. And I think that the students understand that. So for students, what you've clearly seen tonight, Jesse Jackson has a relationship with Stanford University. You know that he was here recently.
She embraced him on many occasions.
Okay, exactly, exactly. Our director of the Asian American Activity Center, Cindy Ng, a math major at Berkeley, worked on the Rainbow Coalition campaign for Jesse Jackson. So as you are thinking about what else do I need to know? Well, what you need to know is that in about 1917, white students threw an Asian student down a flight of stairs. And from there, the Chinese clubhouse was built. Chinese students said, we're going to have our own where we can feel protected. What you need to know, as Clay Carson always says, a movement is not necessarily the masses doing the planning. It's the few dedicated people that are able to do all the things that aren't as sexy, but it's about being able to galvanize the masses when they are necessary. The other thing that you need to think about is that all of these movements are built on other movements here at Stanford, whether it is the Chinese clubhouse, whether it is pushing against internment of Japanese students when they were here, whether it is the taking of the mic in 1968 with the Black Student Union that bore a lot of our community centers and ethnic theme houses. All of it builds. She mentioned the Great Boycott. All of it builds on something. There is always a foundation, and that you all know that as centers, we are really big on legacy. This is the legacy that you have inherited. And I think one thing to end tonight, to be very special, one of our directors is celebrating probably the end of her 24th year, and if you do the math, she is the result of this. Frances, would you please stand up?
Wow.
So some of you ask questions about how do we build coalition. You have to think about social movements on a college campus are tied to national social movements as well, and they talked about that. So some of you have heard of the LEAD project, Leading Through Education, Activism, and Diversity, which is sponsored by the 4 ethnic community centers. And it was started in the late 90s, because guess what? Bill Clinton was in office, we were happy, everything was going great, right? So for us, because we knew there weren't really a lot of social movements, why don't we create a cross-cultural coalition so they can work through some of the hard stuff early on, so when things hit the fan, that they are ready. And what I'd like for you all to know, Gina has come back to speak to them, other alums, so that's how alums are engaged, and there can be other ways that alums are engaged in this process. I also want to mention that we have some posters over here to the right, to my right, and they have all the panelists, including the moderator. We have their name next to the posters. We have pens, students. We want you to write messages to them. This is our gift. Y'all know I go for tears all the time.
Who gets the banner?
We keep the banner. We keep the banner. It was kind of expensive, so you know Cindy is like, we're keeping the banner. But we want you to sign those posters, alum, students, faculty, everyone in this room, to sign the posters so you all can take that and savor this moment and be able to look up every day, even with the heartache and pain, even with the tough times, even with, you know, the questions of am I doing the right thing, to understand that there is a legacy of appreciation for what you did for Stanford University. So tomorrow, at 1:30 in this same room, we will have a bit of a larger panel talking about the untold stories, and our own Free Lewis Jackson will be on that panel. So students, if you want to come back tomorrow at 1:30, with that said, thank you all, we love you, and please go over and sign.